Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us to this topic as a kind of subtopic of social isolation. And usually if we come together, and we just heard an example of how coming together could be a positive, can be a very positive experience. Of course, there can also be negative experiences where when humans come together. As part of looking at social isolation, we want to highlight a very particular topic where events that we perceive in different ways and that are also discussed in different ways are affecting people in our society to some extent, to a lot of extent, or to a quite strong extent. And when we look at people coming together, I think it's important to understand what positive things are happening there and what negative things can affect our well-being and also psychological well-being when these things don't work. We can come together in different formats. We can come together as a country, for example. And at some point in our history, this was called nation building. And connecting all provinces by a railway was, for example, important to come together, or having a public broadcaster. And well, what are things that make these things positive? For example, having a common radio station led to the fact that we have common news and common narratives about what is going on in the world, what is going on in our communities. And these are, at least in my view, not to be underestimated in societies, because we see that we are, if these things don't work anymore, if we don't have shared narratives anymore, and we have like a very different views of reality and what is going on around us and in the world, we have disconnect. And these are like sometimes minor, but also quite severe. And I think we are at the stage of a society where we actually see a lot of these things not working very well. And I think it's very important to see this from a independent point of view. I don't think it's very important to understand that for the purpose of what I'm trying to tell you here, that if you agree or disagree with somebody, the most important thing is that we're very far apart of each other, and that people feel very far apart of each other, and that our society just doesn't work anymore if we have these effects. And it is regardless of what it is that keeps us apart, anything that keeps us apart has a very negative effect. And we've seen that in the previous example about having friends, but this is on a much more substantial level of things that we need as people. We need to feel connected. We need to feel having a check about what we perceive of reality if somebody else perceives it the same way. I'm sure you had the same experience. Somebody moves into your neighborhood or into your building, that you will talk to each other. So what kind of person is this? Is that a friendly or a trustworthy person? And that you will talk to other people in your group and with your neighbors, and you try to kind of recheck, okay, is my perception of reality yours? And can I orient myself? And if you're working together in a company or in a sports team, it's very difficult to work together and have concepts like teamwork if you don't do all these things and all the mechanics of humans working together. And I think it's quite important to realize, take a moment, and understand if none of these things work. We have heard today a lot of examples of how, for example, also trust is a very important aspect about community. Trust in the system that you're in, trust in your view of reality, and also trusting, for example, that if I do something, I can rely on somebody else to do something else, which we usually refer to as teamwork. And as I said, if you were in a sports team, that you are also maybe overcoming a common challenge. Now, if, of course, all these things are challenged, and I want to give you an example of that, just to drastically highlight what I'm talking about here. Just imagine you're living in a community, and there maybe 2 houses down, you see a fire. So the house, like 2 houses down, is burning. And you in your perception, you think, well, if nothing happens, this house will burn, the next house will burn, eventually your house will burn. And you will have an expectation that, of course, the fire brigade will come eventually and will solve this problem, and that your neighbors will have the same view on this. But if that doesn't happen, it will cause a destruction and basically undermine everything that keeps you safe and also sound and trusting into your view of the reality, and also trusting into the system, because you perceive a direct threat to yourself, to your life, to your home. And if nobody else reacts in the same way, you are challenged in the trust, but you're also challenged made to the view of reality. Like, is this house really burning? Are they filming there something? It could happen in Vancouver. So basically, everything that seems to be safe and that keeps you safe is shattered, because you don't have any trust anymore in institutions, in the community, your view of reality, and that isolates you extreme to the extent that will actually undermine your psychological health. And we usually refer to this as a trauma. If you feel without help, without support, left completely alone, and being threatened in your life and your livelihood. And if I transfer this to threats that we all face in different perceptions, of course, which is the anthropogenic induced change to our climate system that does threaten human lives, we do have different perceptions of this. But I want to highlight to the element of people who actually see this as a threat. And I do also, me personally, I see it as a threat to human lives. But if you are confronted with a reality around you that would presumably perceive the threat the same way as a house is burning, so you have certain expectations that people will react in a certain way to this. But if this doesn't happen, and then unfortunately, as we all know, not a lot of progress is made as a community, you are left alone. You're undermined in your trust in the institutions around you, but you're also undermined in your view of reality. Because if you are, and in any circumstances, consider something a threat, you automatically will think that you and others will respond and act in the same way to realize there is a threat, and the severity of the threat should be mirrored by the way how you react to it. But if you don't see people around you reacting the same way as you would expect them to do, you are again undermined in your view of your community, as well as you are undermined maybe also in your own view and your perception of reality.
Svend, I find your points to be very interesting at the moment, especially in the cultural moments that we've seen since the pandemic, which is, trust eroding has led to isolation of certain groups and has resulted in further isolation, where people kind of like veering off in their own way. And then the result has been not necessarily loneliness, but people kind of grouping in a certain way and then acting out in anger, and even in some cases violence. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, let me just finish my introduction, if I may.
Yeah.
And then I will get to those points, if that's okay with you. No
problem.
Okay, and there's one more aspect I want to highlight. So I think everybody, and you reflected as well, understands how these effects can bring about and that it's a way of isolation, but also a way of mental stress, like significant mental stress and psychological health. But I want to highlight one more aspect in this that makes it even worse. And I want to warn that this could be also considered a political view on this matter, but I do share this view with you for a purpose, because it does relate to the aspect of climate anxiety. Now, given the fact that you already feel threatened by something, given the fact that you already consider a failure of your community because the rest of the community is not acting in light of this threat, there is another aspect that I think is important. And if you consider this simple question, if you ask around you, or in your community or in your city, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea to plant a few trees? Everybody most likely will say that's a good idea. But if you ask everybody, oh, let's all significantly change the way we use energy and how we live, of course people will go, whoa, wait a minute, hey, personal freedom and whatever. Like, people wouldn't just agree with you. So there you already see a disconnect, like between environmental perception and the threat of climate change, which I think is very important to distinguish each other. In my field of psychology, there's a lot of people that say, oh, that climate anxiety is like, or climate psychology is the same as environmental psychology. I would strongly disagree with that. Because if you plant a few more trees and you create more ecosystems, that's okay. But with the climate crisis, there needs to be more systematic changes. And if you are emphasizing the individual action as the solution, you do a lot of damage, in my view. And again, warning, that's my view on this matter, but I want to emphasize this because two things happen. One is that you direct energy towards the individual, and maybe that is energy that we should use to make systematic changes. And the second one, which is extremely important, is to somebody who is perceiving this threat and perceiving the severity of this threat and also perceiving the inactivity, now has an additional stress because it is presumably in this narrative the personal fault of me as an individual that nothing has happened. So I'm threatened with three things. I'm undermined in my trust in my society. I feel a significant threat, and I feel guilt because my personal actions are even contributing to this as the major factor, which is factually wrong. It's a systematic problem. But this basically pushes you into psychological hell. If you are feeling undermined, if you're feeling you have no support, and you're feeling guilty because there's no way out of this. And I think this is not only a problem of people who are suffering from this, if you want to put it this way, it's a problem of society and a societal narrative that doesn't help anybody who perceives this as a threat, but does the opposite, makes it even worse. And again, the warning, that's my personal opinion that this is going in the very wrong direction. But I have an esteemed panel here that I would like to hear about their view on these matters and hopefully completely take apart what I just said. But I'm very, very curious to hear your views and want to dive into the specific experiences that my panelists had. And we have Tessa here from BCIT, who's working on their sustainability program and is working on the interchange of personal activities and system change. We have Veronika here from CityHive, who is engaged in the work and also helping personal like individuals to be involved in decision-making on the urban space and local climate action. And we have Cléa here, who is a recent graduate from the BCIT program, but also is the executive director of community organization OurSquamish. So I want to actually start with Cléa, if I may, to have a community view of this. So please also share your personal view, but also I'm interested in what you see and hear in your community, in your engagement, even though you're new in your role, how this problem of climate anxiety potentially comes about or not. Cléa.
Hi, Sven. Thank you for having me. So I'll just pronounce my name, Cléa.
Sorry.
Yes, that's okay. And as you said, I've just started with this community group very recently. It's a placemaking society. Honestly, I hadn't even heard of placemaking before joining the organization, but I find that placemaking does have a role here with climate action and social isolation and climate anxiety, because placemaking is about collaboratively shaping the public realm to bring people together with the places that they share and to form feelings of connection to the community and the place, which then empowers people to act to protect the places that they care and feel connected to. And in terms of kind of your question directly, the perspectives that I've kind of witnessed from other people in terms of climate action, or not climate action, climate anxiety isn't so much from my work life so far. I haven't had an opportunity to engage in that sense, but more kind of my personal life, peers, other people, friend groups. It's just something that comes up so rarely, and when it does, people don't really seem to know how to talk about it. So I think it's kind of exciting that we're here talking about it, because before I was asked to come here and talk about it, it was never something that I had really kind of put words to. But I do think that I have had quite a bit of experience with this topic from a number of different avenues from my personal and kind of educational background. So if you want, I can share that now or give someone else a chance to speak before going in.
Now we're all curious. You just say a few more words from your perspective, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I guess just to give a little bit of background on myself, I grew up in a very, or in an off-grid home right on the ocean. So I was very connected to that place and to nature, and climate change kind of was a lived reality for me before I even kind of knew how to put it into kind of words to express those emotions. But, you know, noticing the intertidal zone change and the starfish disappear, and also kind of living through storms that were kind of growing in intensity over the years, and just having the ocean kind of chip away at our property, and some nights having to leave home because the storms were so intense, or sometimes thinking about having to leave. So in that sense, kind of seeing climate change has been a very lived reality. And even now, even though I haven't lived there in over a decade, the storms are just getting crazier. And my dad is still there. He's in his 70s. So kind of calling from time to time to check in on the, you know, newest update of the storms and making sure that everything is all right. So a lot of people kind of who do like, I'm just seeing it happen like right there in my home, rather than it's just like over there in other places, like, you know, the East Coast right now. Or yeah.
So you have a direct experience in your own life of the environment around you becoming a threat, or becoming dangerous, being eroded, literally.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when you come and live like in Squamish, where this might not happen every day directly, but it's still very much in your awareness, do you feel that you walk around, if I may ask you, that's and people being completely ignorant to these, and do you find that hard to bear?
Yeah, it is. It's sometimes like you'll hear little offhand comments from people, like when it's like, for example, this summer when it was not really quite warm yet and it was still cold, like you would hear somebody at the grocery store say like, so much for, you know, global warming, you know, just like comments like that. Okay.
And it makes you disconnected. Like, it's definitely, I mean, it's very obvious to everybody listening that there is very different views on what's going on, and between you and that person in this moment. And it will be very difficult, at least the one I want to highlight from this is, it's very difficult to come together as a society to solve these issues if we don't have so different views on these matters. We don't have a shared view on these things, if that's okay to say.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, maybe we also have another perspective, and maybe ask Veronika from your work that you do in the CityHive with people, which, by the way, just for transparency, we also support the work of the CityHive, and we just want to commend you also on the work that you do in society. Can you share from your experience what you see and experience with people of different ages that are interested in your program, how they perceive this narrative, and how that maybe relates to their choices of what they do in their lives, of jobs or life choices that they sometimes make?
Definitely, yeah. And I can definitely comment on that both from work and my own personal life. And so, yeah, as a quick introduction and to add to what you just shared, Svend, so I run CityHive, and we're a Metro Vancouver-based organization, and our mission is to transform the way that young people are engaged in local issues and in shaping their cities. And the reason why we began, I'm one of the two co-founders, the reason why we began about 6 years ago is because when we were looking at issues like housing, affordability, climate action, young people wanted to engage, but they weren't being included in decisions that local governments were making. And so we created CityHive to act as a bridge and create direct opportunities for young people to not only learn about local issues, to learn about how their local governments work, but also to create projects, to directly be engaged in decision making and get a taste of what it feels like to be engaged while they're also building relationships with each other and with decision makers. And so for me, and a huge part of our programming is also focused on climate action. And the real impetus for us doing that programming is that often when young people do learn about climate change, they learn about it as this huge, daunting thing that they can't even touch or feel, or they don't really understand what it means to take climate action. And that causes, of course, climate anxiety. And so what we really try to do is say, okay, what does climate change look like on a local level? How have you experienced it in your life? And then also, what does climate action look like on a local level? What can a local government do? And then what can you do to inform and change that system? And so really thinking about climate anxiety and what I'm hearing from young people, and usually we define youth as 35 and under. So we often work with youth who are kind of in the 18 to 30-year-old age range, and then sometimes in younger age ranges. And what I hear from the young people that we work with is definitely an increasing anxiety around climate change. When we first began about 6 years ago, and we did surveys on youth's top urban issues, without kind of at the top of the charts, it was always affordability and housing. And we heard about social isolation in public space, and year after year, as we've done surveys, climate change has always been on top with those issues. And this is also consistent with national polling on the top issues that young Canadians are facing. And I really hear that in all of our programs, that we are starting to get a lot more youth who aren't necessarily defining themselves as the climate nerds, as the climate keeners, and those who are already engaged on climate issues, but they've just felt more anxiety, especially as they've been breathing in wildfire smoke every August, as they've been thinking about whether they want to even have kids because of climate change, and as they've been having to think about all of these huge life decisions with this thing that they don't really know exactly how it's going to affect them. We've been hearing more and more about how youth have been anxious, and that resonates with my own upbringing too. I remember the first time that I learned about climate change, I was at the end of elementary school, and I remember learning about it in class through a class presentation, and same thing, feeling like it was this huge thing that I couldn't even touch. And it wasn't until high school when I started to organize with other high school students, and then started to organize on getting other high school students engaged in climate action, that I started to feel like there's a piece of the pie that I not only had a responsibility for, but that I could also actually tangibly take action on. So for me, I think a big anecdote to that climate anxiety is kind of what the same antidote to social isolation is, which is not only collective organizing, but being able to build solutions that also inherently build community. Yeah, lots more to say there, but maybe I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Veronika. Maybe we highlight one more aspect that I think is not unimportant in this topic as well, and that's a view in the professional world and also in the corporate world. And I just want to say a few words about it, and then I let Tessa also join into this from her whatever she chooses to aspect there. But I want to highlight that also we've seen a lot of research about younger people joining the workforce, that they're quite disenchanted at their workplaces if they learn about the company that they're working for, the organization they're working for, is actually like disregarding this topic, or is not acting responsibility, and it's not a corporate citizen, that has a severe effect on their willingness to be a team player, if they feel that this company or the organization they're working for is discouraging them. And even to the extent that people seriously think about how they want to spend their work life. How can I even make a choice in my work life, or do I choose more money or more responsibility or more social action, and how do I arrange my? And these are not minor issues for, as I'm sure you can appreciate from your own life, in your life, making these kind of choices, because they have a severe effect on the rest of your life, and maybe on your the prosperity of your life, and if you can, what you want to achieve in your life. So these are not unimportant issues as part of this. So, but I let Tessa also share her own personal view, and maybe on this aspect, maybe you can highlight from your experience, from your students, what you see and what you hear, what you think about it.
Yeah, and Svend, I really appreciate you letting Cléa and Veronika kind of come in with their perspective first. I think they're really on the front lines of this in the work that they're doing with both of their organizations to really create spaces and places where we can come together and address this challenge of social isolation. So I think like climate anxiety and social isolation kind of together, right? Like, so I just want to back up, and then I want to talk a little bit about business. So I'm the program head for sustainable business leadership at BCIT. So unsurprising, I'm on a climate anxiety panel. But why are we here as Svend says, at a gathering of talking about social isolation? And so for me, Svend, when you talk about that employee engagement piece, here's who shows up in my classroom. Right? People show up in my classrooms who think there has to be a better way. The way that we built business, the way that we built our systems, the way that we go about our lives, buy our groceries, get around, build our buildings. I swear there has to be a better way. And so when I think about social isolation, and when I see my students who talk about feeling isolated and feeling disconnected, I've been teaching at post-secondary for 15 years. The rates of anxiety and depression and these challenges are just going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And so this, as Svend says, can't be a personal problem. It can't possibly be like we feel the impacts personally of isolation and loneliness. Of course we do. But it is a systems level challenge, right? It's a systems level challenge. And what's such an amazing privilege of working in the education space is that we become a gathering place for people who want to address this symptom of broken systems, which is social isolation and loneliness. That's a symptom. But the larger system that's causing climate change, right? That's causing us to challenge, to feel that cognitive dissonance. You know that feeling when you walk into the grocery store and you just want to make a good choice? You're like, there has to be a better way for me to buy my groceries. There has to be a better way for me to get around. There has to be a better way. And so I think that I want to, I'm going to go, Svend, I didn't tell you I was going to do this. I want to read a really short poem from this very most amazing book, which my camera's not going to pick up, called All We Can Save. It's called All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. Truth, courage. Short? It's only 4 lines.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So my heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. That's Adrienne Rich. And so the poem is All We Can Save, and the book is All We Can Save. And not to put too fine a point on it, but I can't think of a better way to combat social isolation than to feel a part of something that is larger than yourself, right? And so when I talk about all we can save, right? My heart is moved by all we cannot save. So much has been lost. It's really hard to face our grief, but hold fast to a vision for the future. And so what I think, Cléa and I were talking the other day about the panel and preparing, and she said something to me. So Cléa, I'm sorry, I'm going to slightly steal this about anxiety being a signal, right? It's this signal that something's not right. It's a signal that something's not right. And so what I see in our students and the communities that I gather with and the businesses I work with, so Svend, I will now directly answer your question about business, because I work with these businesses specifically right now at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, and they're coming because their employees are disengaged. And their employees want to be a part of solving these big, great challenges like these social and environmental challenges that we're facing. And so what I'm hearing from the business community is we want to build better systems. We want to build better systems that help us live in balance with nature and help us take care of the planet. So Svend, you talked about shared narratives and what are our shared narratives, and whether I'm doing training on ESG, environmental social governance for the business community, or I'm working with our students in our programs, the shared narrative that we're trying to build is it's not too late. It's not too late, and we can act together on climate change. And so I hope that some of you are inspired by what you hear on this panel today. And when you're thinking about tackling social isolation, you bring in a climate lens. You bring in a lens that allows us to imagine a better future and imagine better systems together. Because I've seen students go from feeling completely isolated and completely alone, and employees going from feeling completely isolated and completely alone to feeling engaged and passionate and turned on and excited about building a better world. And so I hope that doesn't put too fine a point on it. I know I recognize some people on the call.
That's fine. Everybody was free to share their view on the matter. I want to bring these things a little bit together in a few words, if that's okay, and then have also, of course, time for people to ask questions. Now, hopefully, with this very short spotlight on an extremely important aspect that we are facing as a society, and I would like to add again my personal view that there's a moral responsibility in society, that this cannot rip us apart. My concern on facing the climate crisis is actually that as a society we fail, rather than on the climate crisis that we're starting to fight each other to finding a solution or preventing a solution. And one of the views that is missing in this is the common good that is missing in there, because that narrative is usually failing. And I always, in my trainings that I also give for companies and cities, usually I use fire protection as an example. We would all sit in an audience in a conference room, and we would all sit on chairs that are made by industry. And if we wouldn't have any fire prevention laws, they would be highly flammable, because it's usually very easy to use cheap chemicals to make stuff. And let's imagine we don't have this. Sure, we can all talk about, hey, we can use our drink to extinguish the fire, every single person, but that will prevent us from thinking about clever regulatory regulations to have fire prevention laws. And the same way, I think it's very important that we come together to remove the isolation, but not only to be together, but finding these better ways together and finding ways that are actually working. And we do have them in our society. We already have ways of protecting human lives. We do have, if a product comes into Canada or is produced in Canada, regulations of how much toxic elements can be in there. Or the most basic thing, our water, our drinking water has regulations. And of course, we have communities in the north that don't benefit from it. But the idea, at least, is that the product should be safe. Most emissions are related to energy. And it's just a natural thing that you just regulate the carbon intensity or the greenhouse gas intensity of energy. And actually, we do this already as a country. We do this in BC through the low carbon fuel standard, and we do this now with the Canadian fuel regulation. this is like hugely innovative. We are the only country in the world that has these kind of regulations in this form, and we'll soon have regulations about electricity. These are solutions that make our lives more safe. They are, of course, influenced by lobbyists, whatever, but they are going in the right direction, at least in my personal view, and also from a subject matter point of view. They are protecting human lives. And I want to encourage everybody to encourage opportunities to find these solutions that are for the common good, that protects everybody, that are socially just, and that are considering that we are talking about human lives, because that's the small corner that everybody is in, that feels isolated, that feels anxiety, that we need to get out of. We need to have solutions together where the common good is a topic. And for example, on the transportation, that's also a common problem that people think about, just like maybe you go from cars to electric cars, but of course public transportation is a solution for transportation that creates a common good for everybody to use, and you don't have also financial means that to participate in this. So these are themes that are we use the word antidote to create common good. And I think this example in Squamish is, of course, a fantastic one with the placemaking, that you are engaged together to shape your environment and shape the factors that are influencing them. This as practical, hopefully practical advice to also the participant, but I do want to go out now also to questions and also to the comment that we had at the beginning about the violence and the questions about this. I'm not sure if you're aware that people in some countries have already have a drastic response to climate anxiety. I know about in Germany where people have glued themselves to the street with glue on main traffic arteries in Berlin, for example, as the only means that they felt is possible to express how severely impacted they feel. And I think it should be an alarming sign to us, and hopefully we don't have this. We will have these effects, unfortunately, also if nothing happens. But how severe this problem is. Okay, let's go to questions from the audience.
I think maybe I'll kind of just jump comments in. I know our group, the group. Is everybody, can you hear me? Am I off mute? There we go. The group can hear me. There are so many really interesting points, and maybe to the panelists, what I could say is how can all the groups who are going to go off and create their solution and present their solution in the weeks to come, how can they draw a line between climate anxiety and social isolation? And the two big ones that have just come out in the last 10 minutes, which is being part of something that's bigger than ourselves and finding common good. Like those are like, oh my goodness, I see some lines here. But we can't go in like these huge swaths and let's start creating policy and like that's way too huge. But how can we be effective now? What's a powerful way where we can draw this line right now for the group?
Maybe I respond to this first and also let the other panelists respond to this. I think I don't think it's a good idea to draw a line between the two, to be honest with you, because it is such a severe effect on everybody, and it's a topic that is on many people's minds, even the ones that don't consider themselves, as we heard, nerds or whatever. So it is like the elephant in the room, so to speak. So I would discourage, actually, from my point of view, to draw a line, because in any form or shape, if you are isolated, and if you draw a solution to this, which is coming together, there should be room to discuss the topics of the day, and maybe not for everybody, for a lot of people that is a topic of the day. So if you are creating spaces where people come together and and finding solutions, not big policies, of course, but also in their community or in their company, or in their social environments to come together to find solutions, to keep that as one of the topics, as well as other, from discrimination to disenchantment or anything else that leads to, or lack of trust that leads to social isolation. There should be room to always have that topic on the agenda if it's necessary to do so. Maybe somebody else in the panel will also want to respond to this.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Svend. I didn't really see why making a line between the two, because the climate crisis is a collective issue which requires a sense of solidarity and community in everyone. And I think solutions are providing platforms for collective action, but not necessarily separating the two.
If I can add to, I think the way that I understood what you were saying about the line was that how can we draw a line between the two and not divide them? And so I think in terms of how we could go about that, and I think kind of to what Tessa brought up at the beginning of like, why are we talking about climate anxiety when we're thinking about social isolation? I think there's two different things that come to mind. One is that when I know that when I have felt the most climate anxiety, and I think in those that I've worked with, when they felt the most climate anxiety, it's when they felt alone and when they felt like they didn't know what they could do with it. They felt paralyzed. And I think that what leads to that feeling alone is if there aren't spaces to talk about it, if there aren't spaces to learn about it, also if there aren't spaces to feel climate anxiety. And so in terms of what that practically might mean for solutions around social isolation, I'll kind of leave it in your hands. But I think thinking about how do we actually provide spaces for conversation, how do we provide spaces for connection, how do we provide spaces for where it's okay to mourn, to grieve, to feel all of the really challenging emotions of climate anxiety. And then the second big thing that comes to mind is really building off of what Tessa shared around how climate change really necessitates us to imagine, and that's something that we've collectively lost, is this ability to collectively imagine. And so I think that whether that's spaces that can inspire that, whether it's systems that we have in place that allow us to imagine before we start to that allow us to imagine collectively and to practice that. And then actually maybe a third thing that's coming to mind too is that I think whether you're thinking about solutions that are more physical, whether they're more political, whether they're behavioral, to always be thinking about a climate lens. So what are the things that if you were to be thinking about climate and social isolation and building community on the same plane, what would those solutions look like? And I think you can add to that too, thinking about economic systems and all of these systems that are interconnected. So I guess all that to say that I would encourage you all to be thinking about the many different systems that social isolation touches on, democracy, and to be thinking of all of those at the forefront while you're building your solutions.
Yeah, and Veronika, maybe I'll actually build on that while also answering both Mark and now Callum's question in the chat, which is around donut economics. That's the economic model we teach in the Sustainable Business Leadership Program at BCIT. At donut economics, just quick, small economics crash course, donut economics says we need to respect the 9 planetary boundaries. That's the outside of the donut. And the inside of the donut is the 12 social determinants of health, basically, social determinants. And we need to create an economy that's within planetary boundaries and takes care of everyone. And so that
Can I just ask a quick question on that?
Yeah.
Why don't you hit us on social determinants? I think that sounds really interesting. Give us can you list those off for us, everybody, right now?
I wonder if I could quickly, if we can put a link to the donut. Callum, I don't know if you want to help me out here and put a link to Kate Raworth's picture of the donut in the chat, because then you can see all 12 of them listed. So social determinants, amazing. There's 12 social determinants in the donut. So if you Google Raworth donut economics, you'll see the 12 determinants on the inside and the 9 planetary boundaries on the outside. But let's talk about what Veronika and Cléa were both saying there, and maybe a little bit about what Mark's saying in the chat around, does talk lead to action? Does talk lead to action? And so just really...
Can I, before you go to that element to the action, can I just and give a different answer to this, because as I also want to point out there, the element that it is important to just feel and talk about this. It is important for psychological health to realize that other people feel the same. That is quite important to realize that you're not alone in this, because that's the one where you feel connected again, and you move out of feeling alone in the black hole. And that we also want to emphasize that that in itself already contributes to health. And as I said, if you feel connected, that will more easily lead you to action. Sorry, Tessa, but you can pick up on that if you don't mind on the action part.
I'm trying to put another book in the chat. You guys can tell I'm a reader. The book I'm trying to put in the chat in response to what Svend just said and what Mark asked about is Saving Us by Katherine Hayhoe. Saving Us by Katherine Hayhoe. And she's a climate scientist. And she says the #1 thing we can do to address climate change is to talk about it. And to actually feel our grief. Because if we don't feel that, we don't have the fuel and the motivation to actually act, because we need to do it through those feelings, through those models. And so what I would say is that what I've seen from our students, and when you're coming up with your solutions, what I've seen from our students and what I've seen from the business community is that the talking about it is like the spark, and the feelings is the spark that ignites these really practical, super practical solutions. And so it might not feel like it's possible to decarbonize your supply chain or get rid of all plastics or do all of these things when you first start thinking about it. But when you come together in community and you talk about what is bothering you, what you're anxious about, what it might mean to not have continued human existence on this planet, which is a genuine possibility, that is when we can actually move through those feelings and towards the actions. There's lots of research that the #1 thing you can do about addressing the climate crisis is to talk about it, because it leads people to then being able to actually think creatively together, not in isolation, but together across difference, to come up with solutions. And if you're looking for specific actions, the future we choose is another one that I put. And they've got 10 actions. If you need inspiration, there's 10 actions in the future we choose.
Okay. Let's just also have like Veronika and Cléa have the chance to say a few more words before we close our panel.
I just wanted to jump in on that note. I 100% agree with what you just shared, Tessa, and I think that's such a great point, Mark, that talk is not the same as action, and it's actually very harmful when institutions just talk and don't take action, when they pay lip service. But I think to add to what and build on what Tessa was just sharing, I think the way that we talk about it is also really important, and there's lots of really awesome social science research on climate action that shows that when you use a doom and gloom narrative, so take action because otherwise we're all duped, we're all going to die, that actually doesn't mobilize action. And the most effective thing to mobilize action is to go with a hopeful narrative. And of course, that's not like an optimistic, everything's going to be fine, we're all going to be okay narrative. But it's to make sure that there's still that very truthful and realistic glimmer of hope, and to quickly move that into action. So the way that we talk about climate change and also who we talk about it with is a really important first step to action.
Okay, thank you very much. Cléa, do you want to also add 2 more? You don't have to if you.
I think Veronika wrapped it up really nicely. Like that was part of something that I've been thinking about as well, just the radical hope kind of grounded in reality, not looking away from the issues, but also not minimizing them and just kind of being grounded in that. But also another thing that I've heard that kind of like adds to that feeling of radical hope and on top of community, but is also visualization. So kind of focusing on the future that we do want to see can be a powerful tool to remind us what we are fighting for. And I do find comfort in that as well, just kind of imagining a life that, or imagining that life will live on even beyond the Anthropocene in whatever shape or form, kind of gives me a feeling of kind of hope too. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Cléa, Tessa, and Veronika. I wanted to close our panel with a call to action, and I want to avoid a misunderstanding. If you are participating and listening to our panel today, and you might feel that that we have a group of people within our society that that have a certain view and feel threatened, and maybe you should think about them, please consider this a common societal moral responsibility. Regardless if you share these views or not, we cannot afford drifting apart on a matter of life and death in our society. If you are engaged in society, if you are acting as a social corporate actor, I know I share this view with others. We feel in this panel that you have a moral responsibility to open your eyes to the problem, and also enabling opportunities to communicate and find dialogues to address this and come together in the society, and don't break apart on this. And there are ways, hopefully you've seen some options that you heard today, how you can incorporate this with that spirit. Thank you very much for participating in our panel today and also listening.
Thanks everyone for coming. This was really, really interesting and engaging. I've learned a